Yeah, I do.
All right. Welcome to our podcast on the legacy of HT Odum and systems ecology. I'm Dave Tilley here with my partner Mark Brown at the University of Florida. And today our spotlight is on Dr. Jim Zucchetto. He's an expert in energy and environmental systems science. Jim shaped energy technology studies at the National Academy of Sciences for over 40 years, serving as the director of the board on energy and environmental systems before retiring in 2018, but he still works on projects from time to time with them. His pioneering work includes contributions to energy supply, transmission, and distribution technologies. He's respected for his analytical approach. Jim also enriched the academic sphere as an assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania and a research fellow at the University of Stockholm. And in Sweden, he worked with Anne-Marie Janssen on studies that looked at the energy basis of agriculture on the island of Gotland. I know we got a lot of folks in Sweden that are be interested in your hearing the history there. Jim received his PhD in 1975 from the Environmental Engineering Sciences Department at the University of Florida, where he worked with Dr. H.T. Odum. So, Jim, welcome. It's great to see you here. It's been a while since we've had a chat, so it's a nice time to catch up and really hear about your journey as you've made your way from into Florida and through Florida and after Florida. So,
Well,
welcome.
thanks. Thanks for getting us all together here. Uh,
So we like,
reminiscing is always difficult, you know. It's just, some things I've forgotten and some things I remember.
yeah, yeah,
You
I'm
know,
sure.
I was working at Bell Labs back in 1971. So I was an engineer. I had a master's in mechanical engineering and electrical systems, and I really didn't know anything about Odum. But I was attracted to, the environmental movement that started up around 1970, with a lot of publicity. And, I was working in high-speed digital communication systems at Bell Labs, and, it's one of the best places to work in the world for if you're interested in communication systems. But I really felt like I really wanted to work on things that were more meaningful and that were gonna help people. And I thought environmental science and working on things that would clean up the environment would be a lot more important thing to work on. So, I applied around for programs, and there were only a few environmental engineering sciences programs, and Florida was one of them. And so I applied and I got accepted, but I didn't get a fellowship right away. So I was sort of going back and forth. I had planned to stay at Bell Labs and not go because they weren't offering me any funding. But then suddenly, in the last minute, like August of 1971, they suddenly offered me a fellowship full time, with a little bit of money to live. And I thought, man, that's great. So I just decided I'm going to go. So I told my boss, hey, sorry to tell you what's this, but I'm leaving in a few weeks, and he was really upset. But anyway, so I headed down I put everything I owned in my Volkswagen Bug and drove down to Gainesville, and stayed in a house, rented a room for a while until I found a place to live, and didn't know anything about Odum, and I was really excited by Florida and the fantastic thunderstorms, and every day at 4 o'clock these incredible thunderstorms would move in, and it was so tropical compared to I'd grown up in New York City in Brooklyn, so I was a real city boy basically, even though I was living in New Jersey at the time. And then I bumped into Suzanne Bailey, who was on a postdoc, I think, with Odum at the time, and she started telling me about Odum. And she said, you got to study with Odum. You got to take his course. He's compared to everybody else in the department, he's the only one that you're going to really learn things from. She really gave me a big spiel on Odum, and then I bumped into Anne-Marie Janssen and Bengt Ove Janssen, who were visiting ecologists from the University of Stockholm, ASCO Laboratory, and they were going to study with Odum for a year. And they were, telling me about Odum's. So I took his course, and I was as soon as I started looking at environment, power, and society, and took his course and started hearing about the systems view of ecosystems in the world. I just got sold about how cool this whole approach to the environment was. So I got really involved in studying with Odum. Environment, Power, and Society was incredible. I love that book. I still love it. I go back and look at it every so often. mesmerized by his insights into, various systems. It was really, it was almost like a revelation of seeing the world completely differently as compared to, the way I was trained in my engineering courses, which were much more focused, and on just the piece, the engineering device or whatever it was, and nothing about the system, nothing about the bigger system.
Mhm.
Speaking of Environment, Power, and Society, do you have a copy of the rewrite that he did just as he was, just before he died?
Oh yeah, I've got that too. Yeah, in fact, I used a bit of that when I taught the course at Maryland in 2019. I used that book as part of the course, along with a couple other books.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a great revised addition to that. But the
Yeah.
original is really the classic.
Oh,
For
yeah.
sure. They're both
Uh,
great.
I mean, I remember, just the insights about, and that was beginning, he and his brother talked about ecosystem services for a while, but, the insights about how nature was contributing and how you could try to measure it and evaluate it. I mean, of course, that's such a huge influence, on so many people, in the following years, the whole concept of nature's contribution to, human systems. No, just enormous.
Yeah.
And I always remember reading about the India and the sacred cow, and how the sacred cow fit into the ecosystem of the time of India. I mean, it was incredible. That was incredible insight as to, it blew my mind away as to thinking about this.
Well, and that famous line, tomatoes made or potatoes made from oil. I mean,
Right,
that's
exactly.
been
Yeah, that
quoted
was,
place.
yeah,
And not fryer oil. The real stuff.
exactly. So
Yeah.
so that's what got me hooked on the systems approach, systems ecology. I'm not sure he was calling it systems ecology back then, but anyway, the ecosystem approach. Trying to remember the phrase. Environment, power, and society kind of captured
Yeah.
everything that was going on that he was thinking about.
So that must have been this is your real introduction to any kind of ecology, because you probably
Yeah,
hadn't had anything as an engineer. I mean, that's kind of how I came out of engineering schools. Like,
yeah, that's right. And
so
in fact, I think it was interesting to see the students who studied under Odum. There were the people who came from the biology and the ecosystem world, and there were people who came from the engineering world, and there were some people who came out of the architectural world, like Mark and Costanza and people, and they all had kind of different training. But I think I brought more of the analytical capabilities to the modeling, and the biologists didn't quite have that kind of background, and so we sort of worked together. I remember helping the Janssens a lot on those ecosystem models of the Baltic. They had the ecology and insights which were teaching me about Baltic ecology, and I had the mathematics to help them model what was going on. So it was interesting amalgam of people that Odum brought together.
yeah, it sounds like it's really key back then too. Like he really did bring it together, different groups, people, different disciplines. But then he had this magic about how he mixed people together. It seemed like one was just like the physical space. I don't know if you remember. I mean, later years, he just had like this one gigantic room where all the students are there. It's this
Right.
very open plan, and
Yeah.
I don't know if the same thing existed back then or
Yeah,
not.
we did. We had in Black Hall, we had one room, and I sat here. I think Maurice Sell sat next to me. Maurice Sell worked in mangroves. I don't know whether Maurice is still around or not. Um, um, Martha Gilliland sat in that office. She she was a geologist by background, and she did the phosphate cycle, and she was working on that. And there was Wade Smith. Remember Wade Smith? And what was he working on? He was working on power plants, Crystal River, as I remember. And who else was sitting in there? I don't know if Mike Kemp was sitting in that. I think he was sitting in that room as well. And
Walter in there?
was Walter in there? Yeah, I think Walter was in there somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was one other person. What was his name? He worked on Sawgrass, I think.
Hmm.
On the Everglades.
Can't remember his name now. Anyway, he did have us all in one room, and some people turned over. Some people got masters, I think, and left, and other people came in. But But I don't think that room was
where were
big.
the wetland people? Were they in a different space?
Yeah, that
like
room wasn't
Mitch?
big. Yeah, that room wasn't big enough to hold everybody. So I think
Mm.
there were people sitting down in the basement of wetlands, as I remember. Wetland Center.
Uh,
I'm sorry, the Black Hall. And then, of course, there was the Wetland Center,
We
which
had
was
a,
up a ways.
we had
Yeah.
a room at the Wetland Center, and that's where Costanza and me and Ed de Bellevue and
Right,
on and on and on.
right.
Yeah.
the Yules, Kathy, and
Well, Kathy never was a student here. She
oh, right,
came in as faculty or as faculty
Right.
staff.
gotcha.
Yeah.
I think it's D too. I didn't realize I had forgotten that you had done all that work in Sweden early on. So, I mean, because in the 1990s, that connection was still going on, and there were people still coming over from Sweden, students, and the Jansens were still a part of that in some realm. But
Yeah. Yeah.
how
Yeah,
did
I
that
got,
how did all that kind of get started, and what was going
well,
on
yeah.
with that?
Well, because I guess my focus, I mean, I worked on a number of models with Odum, during my time there, but I got interested in the regional work, and, Costanza was interested in that. And so I got into, looking at the ecosystem, the regional system of Miami-Dade County. So I was trying to look at cities and the natural systems together. So I really got into his thinking about, the investment ratio and how do you balance man and nature at a larger scale, and modeling cities based on energy and economics. And the Janssens got funding from the Delegation for Energy Research in Sweden, which was like the Department of Energy, to conduct a regional energy study. And it was on Gotland, Sweden, which was an island in the Baltic. So they were interested in finding somebody to help them conduct that analysis, lead the project. And they want to use the Odum approach, energy, economic, and environmental approach, using an Odum approach to the study of Gotland. So they started looking around for somebody that sort of fit my bill. And, I was kind of excited to go to Sweden. So I decided, yeah, okay, I'll go, so I went in 76 after I did a postdoc from 75 to 76 at Gainesville for the Corps of Engineers. We looked at different transportation systems essentially. But then they offered me this position in Sweden, and I went over in 76. So that was the beginning of a long-term relationship with University of Stockholm.
So that was really the first kind of major project that Odum's group had with. Or was
Well,
Odum even a part of what you were doing? Or you were kind of doing it separate from Odum, it sounds like.
well, yeah, we were doing a region. I mean, Odum was working with the Janssens and some other researchers like Fred Wolf, and they were interested in Odum's approach to the Baltic, to ecosystems and applying it to the Baltic Sea. So he had some connections to Sweden, and I think that they kept that up, and I had this created more connections, and we had a lot of people visiting from Europe, from Australia. I mean, a lot of people were interested in the Odum approach, energy, again, tying together energy, economics, environment together, whether it was completely an Odum approach or whether it was a systems approach to understanding the impacts of regions and development on the nature and vice versa. There was a lot of interest. And, I think Walter went over there for a while, as I remember. Kemp went over there. And I'm sure some other people from Odum's group went over. I don't know, Mark, did you ever go to Sweden? I can't remember.
I've been to Sweden a couple of times,
Yeah.
but as part of that foray of groups. How long were you there?
Well, I was there, full-time from 76 to early 78.
Okay.
And then I went back almost every summer until 85.
Oh, wow.
And then I didn't get tenure at Penn, and I sort of decided, oh, the hell with this academic bullshit, I'm going to go out and do something else.
So those summers, that was when you were at Penn.
Yeah. And I was working on the Gotland project with Anne Marie and working on other things as well.
Yeah.
But it always had a big connection to Stockholm. And then in the 90s, there was a conference on energy and economics it was 91, maybe 92 at the out in Saltsjöbaden in Sweden, where they brought together
Oh, yeah.
environmental economists and Odum and a lot of people. It was a big conference. It was really interesting. And then I think there maybe had been a couple other conferences later on in the 90s. Or, Odum, when did he get the
Stockholm Award?
yeah, the Stockholm Award? What year was
I
that?
wish I could remember that.
That was like 87
Oh, was it that early? Okay.
or 88. The paper's in 88, the science paper.
Okay.
I think he must have got it the year before, maybe. Is that right?
Probably.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and look. But anyway, so yeah,
So what was, yeah. So, I mean, how did kind of so Gotland, I don't know anything about the island, but did like much come out of the research? I mean, were they embracing ideas, or is it very kind of
yeah, there
cutting
was.
edge?
I mean, it was like the reason we picked Gotland. I think the reason they picked Gotland was it was a well-defined region. It was an island that had boundaries. It was easy to, not easy, but at least you could figure out what the inputs and outputs were. And I think they were hoping, and if we did offer the project, and the Swedes did offer the project as part of the Man and Biosphere effort that was going on worldwide. So it was a project that was highlighted in the Man and Biosphere program of the United Nations. So again, it was an effort to try to show people, how do you balance humans and nature in some kind of coherent way, a systems way. And back then there was very, very little, wind power, and we talked a lot about the potential for renewables, but there wasn't much going on then. The only natural energies that were really contributing were the wave action from the Baltic and the seaweed coming ashore and the recharging of water and all that, and all the natural systems. But there wasn't much technical energy resource or renewable energy to speak of. Since then, I think there's been a lot of wind power put in place, and they got most of their high quality energy from the mainland. So they had a cable going from the mainland to the island. So they had, of course, Sweden has a lot of hydropower. They were generating a lot of hydroelectric power, and there was surplus. They could transmit that to the island. So from that point of view, they got nice high quality energy with very little environmental impact, directly impact.
Was there controversy back then about the nuclear power and that versus the forest and the hydro resources? Did you get caught up in that at all, or
well, we got
something
caught
came
up
later?
Not in particular in that study, because I don't think there was any likelihood there would be nuclear power on the island. But there was some back and forth about, they used oil to generate electricity on the island, and it was fairly, it wasn't very clean. But in terms of Sweden as a whole, I mean, we certainly had lots of discussions with people about nuclear power and biomass, whether it's ever going to be a net energy yielder or not. But no, I didn't directly work on projects related to that. But I think our thinking, we would meet with the delegation, with a board. We had an oversight board from the Delegation for Energy Research, and we'd get together, I don't know, maybe once a month or once every couple of months, and we would talk to them about our project, what progress we were making, and we would talk about Odum concepts. We talk about net energy. We talk about energy quality. We have all these discussions with people. And I don't know whether it had much influence. Maybe it did, I think, to some people, and they could carry those ideas back out to wherever they worked.
So agriculture must have been a large,
yeah, it was part of
piece of that,
right? And we had an agricultural model that was part of the total study. And we had some water hydrology models we put together. We had some coastal Baltic ecosystem models that we put together. So it was a pretty big effort. And it happened over years. And of course, you've seen the book. A book came out of it. Several books, 2 books came out of it. A monograph, a lot of papers talking about different pieces.
Thanks.
And the book talked about the whole thing.
So we jumped ahead from pass by Gainesville experience probably a little too fast, but maybe go back to.
Yeah.
We like to hear that there's like stories about, the class you're in. He taught you, so he's teaching the course based on environment, power, and society. I'm guessing he's
Well,
probably teaching the oceanography, meteorology,
right,
coastal ecology course.
right.
So what was anything stick out
Well,
about your experience in Gainesville?
what sticks out? When I did some as part of the courses, I did some ecosystem. I did modeling of the Silver Springs ecosystem, which of course Odum did pioneering work on in 1955, and he had that famous paper on Silver Springs, and so I had a lot of fun, putting models together with, we had analog computers back then. So we had all these wires, we had this big board, and you have to put together, you'd have to actually construct your circuitry, basically with wires and capacitors and resistors, etc. And it was kind of I look back at it now, I wish we had spent more time using digital computers and programming languages, because analog computers took up a lot of time, but they were interesting. They were fun to play with. But later on, of course, I do digital computers a lot more. And before I went to Gainesville, I was using IBM computers. But when you went to Gainesville, suddenly you're back using these analog computers. And Odum would be up there and he'd be showing you how to model something, he'd be sticking wires in and pointing them out. It's like, and they'd be flipping knobs and everything. And suddenly you'd be getting this curve coming out. It's like,
how complex could the models get when you're doing it on an analog? I mean, like feedback must have been, you had to be very careful about feedback, or.
well, I mean, I'm not sure, the board, depending on how big the analog computer you had was. And I guess we could model something with, I don't know, Mark, maybe 10 or 12 state variables. I mean, beyond that,
Okay.
I think Maricel had the record. Remember, he had slaved two Miniacs together and had two of them running simultaneously. And so you had to put a board on both of them and then connect the wires between the two. No, actually they were connected, and if take two people carrying his boards and putting it on the machine, he had the record for the most complex.
I remember that.
Mangrove model.
Yeah, mangroves. Well, it's funny because again, getting back to the engineering, because I think I used analog computers way back in maybe, my sophomore year of engineering school.
Yeah.
And so I had some familiarity with them, but they were sort of, passed by. But it was kind of a clever way to be more intuitive with the models that you were putting together. I mean, you could sort of see right firsthand in front of you how changing things would affect the behavior. So from one point of view, it was kind of an interesting pedagogical tool, teaching tool.
Yeah.
But it wasn't easy to put on, big complex models like we can, obviously do now.
Yeah, every wire was a flow on the from the diagram, so it was barely, that part was kind of intuitive.
And then I remember helping again some of the people who didn't come from an engineering background, like helping them put the models together, like Anne-Marie Janssen and Bengt Over, they were ecologists, and I helped them a lot with putting the boards together.
Yeah.
Or I think I remember, was it Linda Searle that was an architect student?
Yeah.
And I remember she was like, I don't think she had much analytical training, but she was an architect by background. So I was helping her with putting those. It was really fun to work with people to do all that sort of stuff. So it was really cool.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of interesting too, because 1973, we had the energy crisis in the United States, and we really felt like Odum was prescient about what was happening. And it was just amazing because he was talking about all this stuff beforehand, really. And maybe he got the timing wrong, and maybe we're looking back now, we don't have a really good handle on what the resource base really was. But it was like amazing. This whole thing, suddenly we were in the middle of all this, and we really felt like we had our hands on one of the most critical things to think about, and that was energy and how it was connected to everything. And then Odum got that, he had that AEC grant, Atomic Energy Commission. He used to get, I don't know how much he got a year, but he was able to support a few students on a very modest amount of money. But they basically let him do whatever he wanted to do. he could think about, models of the universe, they would let him do it because
Yeah.
they realized what a genius Odum was and how creative he was. And they wanted to just, uh, let a thousand flowers bloom, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I worked on some of those, I got money on some of those grants. Um, and in fact, we worked, remember the Vietnam project in which I guess it stressed all of us out. I think Mark quit for a while based on that stuff.
Yeah, I got really depressed reading the literature about what was going on over
Yeah.
there. Walked away.
Yeah, we were putting a model together of Vietnam, and we were trying to understand order, disorder. I mean, forget about the people that are being killed, forget about war. What's the long-term effect? And we were trying to remodel how long would it take for the mangrove forest to come back, for example, and the forest to come back. And so we were creating these macro models. And I remember I also had a run-in with Odum on that project because I was having trouble finishing. I was going through a personal crisis at the end of 1972. I was breaking up with a girlfriend at the point in time. I was really kind of down. And Odum, I had to put this model together about Vietnam, and I really couldn't get my act together. And I was really like you, Mark. I was like, what the hell am I doing with this Vietnam model? I just sort of shut down. And Odum had given me a deadline to do something. And so I came in, and Odum came into, I think, Black Hole, the meeting. He said to me, he says, you either get this model done, or something to the effect, you either get this model done or, that's it, you're out. It was like an ultimatum. And I thought to myself, so I left, and I went home, and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? And I just sort of marshaled my strength, and I sat down and I worked nonstop, I don't know, for 2 weeks, and got this model together and got results and wrote it up and gave it to Odum. And I think he respected me ever since I did that for him. And so I think he accepted my ups and downs during my graduate studies. I don't know. I remember that distinctly.
I quit and I went over and started throwing pottery. Became I was going to do ceramics. Just couldn't with what I was learning about Vietnam. And then he came and found me and said, we've invested a lot in you. You're just going to let all that go to waste? And oh man, that really got to me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
It must have been unheard of to do that kind of modeling back then, to do like a model of a war. I mean, beginning with analog computers, right? Or is he doing digital?
Well,
No,
no, these are simple macroscopic model. I call them macro mini models or mini macro models.
Yeah.
It was trying to put together a model that would only have 6 or 8 variables. So we were looking at disorder was being created by the war, the explosives, the bombing. The order was the sun basically in photosynthesis and regrowing everything. So it was these are very macroscopic models. There was not a lot of detail. And
he was going over there doing sampling too with the mangroves, right? Did he actually go with students going over there as well? Or did that come,
I
or maybe
think
somebody
he
else
did
was
go.
doing
I
that?
think he did go over there, yeah, but I don't remember exactly when that was.
I mean, there's a report on the whole project, right?
Yeah, right.
I've seen.
Herbicides and the mangroves, right? That's right. Herbicides.
But
of Vietnam.
is your model in that report? Is this
I think it probably is, yeah.
yeah. So the project was to study the effect of herbicides on mangroves, and
Right.
as Odum always did, he would take what little money he got and he would spread it around. And so we were modeling the country at war. We were modeling order and disorder. Many people were working on very, very different things than what the Department of Defense had initially thought they were funding.
Uh-huh. Well, that's my first, when I came to visit Mark in 1993, I came in the summer to visit you to see if I wanted to come to school there. And you handed me the write-up on your model of the Vietnam War. And I remember taking that thing home and I was looking at it. And of course, I didn't understand the systems diagramming and the language and all that stuff. And I'm like, man, how do you understand this? This is crazy. And I try to tell somebody what I was doing and they'd just be like, too much.
Yeah, I think it drove us crazy too. But because it's really hard to accept the fact that I mean, you know, you could obviously think about it in a lot of detail and look at the human cost and everything. But Odum was he was just trying to step back. I mean, he wasn't, I mean, he certainly didn't sanction the war or anything like that, but he was trying to understand in the long term, you know, what would happen. And, you know, in many ways, these systems do recover. And,
What's like the time scale that you guys simulated it for? Like
yeah,
decades or centuries
100 years maybe.
uh-huh.
Yeah,
So you weren't really looking like the political kind of aspects of it, the
no,
economic,
no.
more on
Well,
the
mine was,
ecologies.
mine was the country of Vietnam at war, and I ran the model and then took away the U.S. Involvement because we were really support. I mean, it was really our war. It wasn't the Vietnamese.
Yeah.
You know, the amount of energy that was coming from the U.S. dwarfed the amount that was there that was coming from local. And then the aid that we were sending, a huge quantity of aid in all forms. So I modeled it at war, and then I took away the aid, and the whole country collapsed.
Mm.
And so the model predicted what actually happened. As soon as we left and we stopped paying the bills, you know, Vietnam just walked down and took over.
Yeah.
That model is published in that book by Charlie Hall and John Day, Ecosystem Modeling, Theory and Practice, something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, nice. All right, so
Yeah, it's funny because I had a French philosophy student come and visit me at the academy about 2017 or 16. I can't remember exactly what date. And he had called me up and he said, you know, do you mind if I come up and interview you? I've been reading a lot about Odum's work, and I was curious about the work you did in Vietnam and stuff. So he came up and he talked to me about that. But I never heard, I don't know what ever happened. He was working on his PhD dissertation, but maybe he lost interest. I don't know. Never heard back from him.
so what was thing about PhDs? What was the focus of your PhD at Florida, and what did you work on various projects, or was the projects related to your PhD? How that all
Well,
come together?
yeah, until I focused on my PhD dissertation, I worked on a bunch of different projects, but then I focused on urban systems basically, and so my task was I focused on Miami-Dade County, and to put together a model and collect data about energy and environment in Miami-Dade County. So it was really one of the first. I mean, there was no internet back then, right? There were no centralized database. I had to cobble together, you know, all this information, you know, basically by sorting through records in City Hall and talking to people and trying to, I don't know, you know, I really never had a chance to figure out how accurate that data was, but the models are fairly, I don't know, they're fairly accurate in the short term, but basically it was one of the first models of a city, an energy basis of a city, basically. And, you know, I ran some models about how it would behave under different price regimes. And so that was a real challenge. I sometimes think I shouldn't have done that because perhaps it was more of an economist approach, but nobody was looking at energy in cities back then. So that was my unique approach, I guess, an Odin's approach.
So how did you get involved in Miami? Why was it Miami and not West Palm Beach or some other place?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Why did I pick Miami? I guess because it was a major part of the state, you know,
Okay.
major city.
Well, he was doing the South Florida project at that time, right?
Right. Yeah, so it was probably connected to that. He's probably able to fund some of me out of that project. And then, you know, I look back at it now, you know, looking to the future in models, I really didn't pay enough attention to the impact of South America on South Florida. I think if I had done the project 10 years later, that would have been a lot more of my interest and focus. Because obviously, just like Vietnam, you can't really look at South Florida, without thinking about South America. A lot of money flew in.
Plus that principle that Odum liked to profess about, you got to look at the next larger scale. So
Yeah,
sometimes it's
exactly.
hard to know what
Yep.
those larger scales going to be into the
Exactly.
future.
Yep.
Although I guess
Yeah.
the Cubans coming over in the 60s, I don't know if that was a foreshadowing of that or not, but it probably wasn't that.
Yeah. You know, I was
Didn't
so
represent that
focused.
huge of a flow from an
Right.
energetic standpoint.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was really focused on the energy and the energy part of the system. I should have looked more at, you know, population. You know, it's hard to, I mean, Florida, of course, has changed so much since the early 70s. A lot of population, obviously, flow into the state. It's changed a lot of things. You know, we were sort of trying to, you know, we weren't active politically, but we were certainly concerned about the disappearance of mangroves and disappearance of the Everglades and all the impacts that human development was having on the state. But the developers seem to have won out, Mark.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I look at you know, aerial photos now of the coasts in Florida. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, just total development everywhere. It's just incredible.
You know, it's maximum power. You
Yeah.
know, you cannot defeat maximum power. You can try, but
Yeah, I'm always amazed when you're driving north on 95 from Miami and you just look to the east and just see the high rises off to the coast. It just goes on like to Fort Lauderdale right and past.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we went to Panama City. My son has a condo in Panama City. He lives in Atlanta, but we went down there to hopefully meet him, and it was during the pandemic. I think it was 2021 over Christmas. I couldn't believe the development along along the Gulf Coast. It was, we found one place that was still like it was 60 years ago. There were a few houses left on the beach, and we rented one of those. But everywhere there were just, you know,
Yeah.
high rises, the hotels that way and that. I couldn't believe it. I mean, just so much has changed. I mean, the beach is still quite nice, but you get rid of the hotels.
Yeah, you just can't look backwards.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So
Um,
you went from Gainesville to Penn, right?
Well, Gainesville, I went to Stockholm.
Stockholm first, that's right.
Well,
Yeah.
first I did the postdoc in 75 to 76 with Suzanne Bailey. She was in principle the PI, but I did most of the stuff for the Corps of Engineers. It was really looking at alternative means of transporting coal, looking at net energy of transporting coal by various means, barges, pipelines, railroads, etc. That was an interesting study. And the Corps of Engineers really liked it. They really, I tried to do some analysis of how you would integrate natural energy, estimates of the energy costs of, benefit cost analysis, incorporating energetics into it, energy analysis. And the Corps of Engineers really seemed kind of interested in that. And I think they would have actually given us more money if I hadn't decided to leave. But anyway, we finished on the project. I got offered the position in Sweden, and I left in 76.
Okay.
After a year. And I think Kilstra, you know, in Gainesville also, remember Chet Kilstra? Oh yeah, the thing I loved about the work in Gainesville was the net energy analysis work.
Yeah.
That was really, there were two things that really struck us as really innovative. One was the total energy you had to look at. You couldn't just look at, direct energy where you were. You had to look at the entire chain, entire supply chain, basically what they call it now. But as you know, the energy analysis. But you really had to look at what were the energy costs of bringing the materials, what were the energy costs of building something, the capital. That was like a huge insight, a huge change in the way we approached energy in general, the way energy analysis was conducted. So that was a huge thing. And then the net energy analysis, that was so cool. And we started looking at, all these different energy sources, nuclear and coal and oil and the renewables and nuclear and fusion. I mean, And it was just incredible. We were generating all these estimates of what the net energy analysis was of all these different sources. And that resulted in that report to Congress by Odum and a bunch of other people. And those two studies, those two insights really changed, the whole field of energy analysis. Which to this day, which I think people are still grappling with.
Up until then, the economists had a hold of everything. And I remember Arab oil embargo and quote the energy crisis, and the economists saying, "Oh, well, energy only makes up 3% of the national economy. I mean, it's not going to have an effect at all." And Odum was just livid. How could you say that? That it's the energy that drives the economy, and he would go on and on about the economists saying it'll only affect 3% of the economy. That's not much. It'll be over in no time.
Yeah. And then, the whole relationship between energy and economics and the correlation the graphs would be generated. It was such a tight fix. But, I think some ways maybe we should have paid more attention to the evolution of technology, because obviously technology's changed, and it does change. And where we're going, I'm not sure where, who knows. But so I think we needed to think more about evolution of technology. But those are such incredible insights. I mean, just unbelievable. And again, another energy crisis, 1979. There was just such turmoil going on. Energy was at the center of everything. It was just amazing.
When you're saying technology, you're saying like energy technology, like how we
energy and in general, even information technology. How is that changing things? I mean, is it going to change? I mean, we were speculating a lot about, at least later on, maybe not so much during the Gainesville days, but will modern communications change commuting patterns? Will we be able to work at home? Will it change people's places of residence? I was thinking a lot about that as far as my regional studies thinking, and what's the influence of energy on the patterns of human organization in space. And so, it sort of went back and forth and never really happened. But, the COVID and Zoom, it seemed to prove that it could be done to a much greater extent than we thought. So we'll see.
Sure.
Yeah, we were just looking at the energy statistics this morning in my class, and you look at that dip, that 2020 dip in the total energy consumption it's it's very noticeable.
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
COVID.
And then, all the analysis that have been done of the full fuel cycle analysis of all these technologies, energy technologies, or development, or, biomass or biofuels, we're still, people are still conducting analyses. They're still trying to figure out, is it net energy? Is it not? Is it CO2 negative or positive? I mean, now, of course, we have to worry about climate change. So that's such a centerpiece of everything. We didn't think much at least I didn't think much about climate change back in the Gainesville days. But Odum did think a lot about the carbon cycle and the strontium cycle and the phosphorus cycle. But I don't remember him talking much about climate change. Do you, Mark? I don't really remember that.
A little bit. And he was, first of all, he didn't like the concept of global warming, because he would say that the planet has the ability to create, if you put more energy in, you generate more water vapor, and therefore you wind up with more clouds, which then will reflect energy. And he thought that the planet was more homeostatic than people were giving it credit for. And so the whole concept of, well, global warming was going to get really hot and everything was going to go to hell. And, to that point, I still agree. I don't think that, and this is where I'm considered a blasphemous, I don't believe it's carbon. I don't think that what's happening on planet Earth is being driven by humans' release of carbon. I mean, that's blasphemous right now. You get drummed out of the scientific world.
Definitely. Well, but I mean, but if you do look at the long-term geology record, you do see, I mean, obviously there's been periods of much warmer periods on Earth and higher CO2 levels, and vice versa. There's been cooler periods. So, I mean, we could, my fear is we may run into a feedback loop, a positive feedback loop, in which we will, generate more warming than we're even experiencing now. But
Yeah.
you're right, there are other compensating,
There is,
features that are negative, so I don't know.
there's a whole body of people that say that the CO2 increased as a result of warming, not the warming increased as a result of CO2. And, without doing a couple of lectures on it, which I'm preparing, I'm getting ready to do them, to try and at least address the questions about it. But that's another guess.
Well, again, it gets back to modeling, and it's centerpiece of way systems ecology think about the world. And now we can have much more detailed spatial study models, and so we can do a lot more than we could in the past, obviously. But it's it's going to be, I think we're going to be arguing about it until until hell freezes over, as they say.
or boils over, as they say. So when you were at Penn, did you interact much with Ian McHarg?
I did, and in fact, I should have taken his offer. He offered me a position in his department, and if I had taken his position, if I had taken his offer, I probably would have gotten tenure.
Right.
Because I wouldn't have had to compete with all the School of Arts and Sciences, with all the people, physicists and chemists, and the science who weren't too quite sure what I was doing, or what regional science was doing, or what systems ecology was all about. In McHarg's school, he accepted Odum, he accepted modeling, and I would have been supported by him. And so who knows? My life would have been a lot different.
Yeah.
In many ways. I would have stayed there probably, and wouldn't have had a lot of upheaval that losing tenure and having to move generated in my life.
So did you come to Gainesville when he came and we had that little mini conference here, Ian McHarg and a couple other people?
What year was that, you think?
Boy.
Was it during the early 70s?
Yeah, it was in the 70s, I think. We produced a book out of it. Everybody made a presentation, had to do a book. I mean, had to do a written chapter, and then we collected them all and made a book out of it. But the reason I ask anyway, Ian McHarg arrived, and he flew first class.
Oh yeah.
To Gainesville, right? And every other word out of his mouth is the F word. The F bomb, right? He was an F bomber. And so he starts out by saying, I don't care what you effing people think about me or anything else. I only fly effing first class. And then it went on from there. And he gave an interesting lecture, and he said he refused to write it. And so I recorded this lecture of his, and I took it to a service here in Gainesville, and I said, would you please, translate this and put it in, type it out. And I went back to get it, and the woman was really mad at me. And she said, because every other word out of his mouth was an F-bomb. And he said, I've never had to do anything as horrible as this. And don't you ever bring me anything about this again.
Heavens to Betsy. Well, McHarg was what was he? I think he was a paratrooper in World War II. He was a tough guy.
Yeah.
He had one lung removed because he was a chain smoker. So I would be talking with him, we'd talk in Penn. He'd be smoking away, and then take another cigarette out, light it up on the cigarette in his mouth, and throw it down, and starts puffing away. And it was unbelievable. He was very tough. And he blamed, his wife died, his first wife died of I think lung cancer. And he blamed that on the atomic testing. And I thought to myself, shit, it was atomic testing, or was it smoking? I don't know, but I didn't say anything.
Ooh. So maybe for our listeners, you guys can just give us a thumbnail sketch of who he was and how he was related to systems ecology, because I know he's a big name.
Well, he was a landscape architect, and he developed, he wrote this book called Design with Nature, which had a real big impact. And I remember that, I think I studied that in the 70s, and I saw it. And basically his approach was he would overlay various of a landscape, like I think, water slope, and photosynthetic production, and topology, various natural features. He'd had this technique of overlaying things, which would give him the optimum place to design, to put built structures. And so he basically was designing with nature. And he was a very clever guy. He was very smart.
Yeah.
And he had this approach, and he really loves Odum's approach. He thought that was right on, that you had to look at natural energies, you had to look at both of them. You had to find places where, you maximize the contribution of nature, you destroy the natural contributions, and that's where you would develop. That's the way you would develop. And so he had a whole school. It was a school of landscape architecture and regional planning at the University of Pennsylvania. He was the chairman, and he had all kinds of people, in the department, anthropologists, landscape architects, regular architects, some engineers, hydrologists, and so it was a real systems group. And I probably should have taken that position because I probably would have fit in many ways more naturally. But it wasn't very analytical, so I guess I wanted to stay in the department which had more analysis in it than his group did.
Yeah. But that book, Design with Nature, took us by a storm. I mean, it was one of those, of course, you overlay all of the things that you are constraints, and the areas that don't have much overlay are the places to build, whether it's a highway or whether it's a hospital. And so we used to do that, and then we tried it with energy. So we would then play around with overlaying the different productivities and so forth. But anyway, he was very, very influential in the 70s with the whole concept of design with nature.
Yeah, sometimes I see these op-ed pieces in the New York Times or whatever, and I keep thinking somebody should go back and say all these things have been said before. Look at McCarg's Design with Nature, or look at Odum's, systems ecology, and sort of explain to people that, all this stuff, it was all talked about 30, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But of course, time moves on, new figures come up.
And the societal memory is not that good.
Yeah, exactly. It isn't.
Um,
Yeah, in fact, when I review papers for one of the things I do is review papers for the Journal of Environmental Modeling. And I did review a few papers about 6 months ago, and I really was really struck by it. It was a modeling paper, and I was struck by the fact I didn't cite anybody before 1990 or something. So I decided, why don't you cite Odum? Why don't you cite this? Why don't you cite that? I said we shouldn't lose history. We shouldn't lose a history about a lot of the stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
So they did include some additional citations.
Well, I remember when I was writing my dissertation, I was doing something similar. I forget how many years I was going back, but I was only going back so far.
Right.
And really got on my case and said, "What? No science happened before 1950?"
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I'm sort of out of the loop, Dave and Mark, but how much is Odum cited these days in the ecological literature? I mean, there's so much, obviously there's so much going on about genetics and microbiology.
I think, what I find is all these new modern kind of systems metrics that people use, like the carbon accounting and the ecological footprint. And I think they've really they don't understand the background, the history of it. People are very concerned about carbon, so they focus on that so much. But really all this comes, like, you can see the lineage. It goes back to these revelations he had in the 70s. So, but there's, the energy community strong. Mark is very good about keeping that group together. So there's a strong contingent there. And then we have the ecological engineering group. So they're pretty good about it. But as far as like ESA goes, I don't really know. Pat's more in tune with that group. Pat thought it would be actually good to take our podcast to them and get ESA to list them on their website and to kind of market them for us so people don't lose sight of the history.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't see it. I would have cited much in the ecological modeling papers that come across. I'm sometimes asked to review.
Yeah. I think the one thing, like most of his models, he loved the macroscopic mini model, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think they're so profound in their simplicity, and they give you this ability to really look into a certain aspect. But most people who model go the other route. They want a lot of precision and a lot of components and
Mhm.
more sophisticated math and 100 parameters, all that kind of stuff. So I think that may have some. That's my
Yeah.
guess. People don't
Yeah,
appreciate
there's certainly
the
more
style.
detail. Yeah.
Yeah.
Odum really, also, I think people lose sight of the fact, I think I mentioned it before, he did a lot of work, his original PhD dissertation, I think, was on the strontium cycle. And that was inspired by the atomic testing. He was back in the early 50s. But he did think a lot about nutrient cycles and global cycles of carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen. I mean, him and his brother, both of them, thought a lot about that. So
Yeah.
I think one of his best revelations at the end of his career was when looking at the lead cycle. They had this project with Joe Delfino had been the department chair in Florida, so they had this project. And maybe Mark, I don't know if you were involved in that project,
I was not.
but it really made them think about the global lead cycle. So he came up with some really kind of profound ideas about how the biogeochemical cycles are tied to the energy hierarchy. He was proposing as like the fifth and sixth laws of thermodynamics. So,
Hmm.
but big
Right.
ideas.
Interesting.
Um,
Well, one thing about one about cycles, I remember he used to speculate about the carbon cycle, and that in some way it was almost a teleological thing that humans were recycling carbon back into the biosphere so it would maximize power. Maybe
mhm.
and you really think about it, yeah, we're digging up all this stuff that's been buried for millions of years. We're bringing it back in the biosphere, and we're stimulating all this photosynthesis, and it's going to, if you look back a few thousand years back to this period, that's what it's going to look like. There was some
Yeah,
upheaval. There was some gigantic, global upheaval of carbon that really changed the whole photosynthetic
yeah.
uh,
I've
regime
thought about that way before and probably learned it from him. But I think also too the nitrogen, all this
and
artificial
nitrogen.
nitrogen that
Yeah,
we're
for sure.
completely changed. Of course, that's all energy, but
Yeah,
pretty much. But yeah, um, there's almost blasphemous kind of thinking, these days.
it's all
People,
it's
I think
pretty.
that's what
It is.
bothers me mostly about the sustainability movement is it's all about minimizing everything. Basically, everybody wants to drive everything to zero. Like we shouldn't be using energy. We shouldn't be using carbon intense fuels. But that just goes completely the opposite direction of maximum power.
Yeah.
And
You can't do it.
they
People
give
have,
their credence to that theory.
they got to
They're
get
like,
Yeah. Although, maximizing efficiency does produce more useful energy, right? So,
well, yeah, I think that's what some modeling I did was like you really think about, there's innovation that produces the technology that takes a lot of energy to do that. But then once you create it, then you want to make it efficient, right? So you create the
yeah,
nuclear power plant and then you worry about efficiency. You
yeah.
create the computer, then you worry about the efficiency of
Yeah.
it.
Create the
So,
engine, create an engine, and you figure out how to make more efficient over time. And
yeah, so that
it happens.
efficiency comes after the innovation. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a part of the maximum power principle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it fits in.
Um, That's what I was finding interesting was like the visitors, like, a lot of the people we've talked to, Charlie and Walter and Pat and everybody, they always talk about how Odom was never there because he's always traveling.
Hmm.
But it seemed like to me too, like he must have had a lot of visitors coming in the 70s. Is that right?
Yeah,
Like you
yeah,
just Mont
definitely.
McHargue and
Yeah.
remember Tom
Yeah,
Robertson talking about all these poets? Is
yeah,
it
the
the
poets
beat
came in.
poets?
I have a
Yeah.
picture. I could send that to you. I have a picture of the three poets whose names escape me right at the moment. With him in the middle, it's really pretty cool. It was really exciting.
Were there other like scientists or economists that
Yeah,
would
they
come
were,
in?
they were poets.
yeah, they were real poets. Allen Ginsberg is one of them.
It's on the tip of my tongue.
I know Tom Robertson
Very,
claims that he had a hand
very
in getting it
sad.
organized.
Could be. Tom had his hands in a lot of places. I'll send you the poster when I have to find it.
Yeah,
Very,
we can if you send us the picture, we'll add it to the podcast. So we'll have maybe that'd be great.
Okay.
Bill Mitch
So-
has some pictures of you guys. We should show you that one. I could dig that up, but it's you from the 1970s.
Oh, yeah.
Whole picture group of you guys standing
Oh,
around
that's
Odom.
nice.
So a second one was Gary Snyder.
Gary Snyder, that's right. That's another one.
Trying to remember the last one.
Ginsburg, and it was one other person, yeah.
Uh,
I can't remember.
What they call it? They always came in threes? This is
Yeah.
beyond my historical
No,
knowledge.
I don't think so.
No, they just happened to. What about other like scientists and ecologists? I mean, did his brother ever come to
Well,
visit
but
when you
yeah,
guys were there?
yeah,
Or...
EP came down once in a while. Bernie Patton
Uh-huh.
was a lot of interaction with Odum over the years.
What was it like when Gene Odom visited? Did you guys get to interact with him and stuff? And
Well, I did one lecture with Odum. I went up to the University of Georgia, Athens on optimum balance of man-nature kind of presentation. But I didn't have a lot of interaction with Eugene. A little bit.
according to Google, it says Jack Kerouac, William Burroughs, and Allen Ginsberg, and then
no,
maybe
No, I don't think Kerouac was there.
he was.
Reedy's Lou Welch, Philip Whalen, Gary Snyder's on here.
Yeah.
Snyder.
Not ringing bells.
Allen Greensburg, but I can't.
Yeah, Allen Ginsberg was there.
hmm
I think I have that same. It's a hand drawing, right? That you
Yeah,
have.
it's a hand drawing, right?
I have it somewhere.
Yeah.
We should look up
find
and
it.
see if Tom used to contact. He was good about contacting you about every 6 months. I haven't heard from him.
Yeah, he
Yep.
used to come over to the academy every so often and tell me, did you know that in law it says that every energy technology has to be evaluated based on its net energy contribution? I said, yeah, I guess, Tom, but I mean, what do you want me to do about it? You know, it's like he felt like he thought I had power to tell the government what to do about what they're going to fund, you know.
Yeah.
So what? So you leave Penn, so then you go straight to the National Academy, start
So
working
yeah, I
at
left
DC.
Penn in 1985. I left. I went to the academy April of 1985, and what was called the Energy Engineering Board at the time, and really didn't know what I was getting into, but I know they were focused on energy, so it was interesting to me. A lot of it was focused on energy, particular energy technologies, and my first project was focused on light water reactor accidents with a focus on hydrogen combustion and and light water reactor accidents. And my other project I started, my first project was on adiabatic diesel engines, was highly efficient internal combustion engines that were being worked on. And I got a chance to go to Japan for 2 weeks and Europe for 2 weeks on that project. That was fun. But it was very different than systems ecology, to say the least. And I thought I would go to the academy for a year and, I'd find something else to do, I'd find another position. But, my kids got locked into school and
Yeah.
got locked in, and I was making, what I found interesting about working in the academy was that we produced, I worked with a lot of smart people, obviously from all around the country and the world. And we'd produce reports and people would actually, do something about the recommendations. So the Congress or the administration would actually look at the recommendations and say, hey, that's a good idea, let's do that. So it became very seductive after a while that there were people that were actually going to listen to the things that I was working on. Even though I might not have been an expert in that particular subject, I was part of a group that was putting together the analysis and everything. So it became very seductive. And so rather than writing a paper by myself that maybe, 60 people in the world read and after they read it, that was it. My report, the reports had some kind of impact. So
Yeah,
I
it's
ended up
nice to be
staying
able
there
to
for
have the
35
impact.
years or whatever, 40 years. Here it is. Eventually I worked my way up. I became director of the board, which was expanded to energy and environmental systems in 1996. And, we worked on a lot of interesting projects over the years, and some of which were focused on the environment, and others which were later, focused on technology. So,
Must have been some contentious topics you addressed during that time.
yeah, oh yeah, definitely, definitely some contentious. I mean, that hydrogen, nuclear power accidents is always a contentious. Anything dealing with nuclear power is contentious, and you'd have people showing up at meetings who are anti-nuclear or whatever, and they would sometimes create a fuss or try to stage a demonstration or something. But then trying to get committees to agree on what they wanted to say was always a difficult chore.
Do you have much opinion about what's going on today with like electricity generation? And I mean, we've had a pretty good boost in wind and solar, but it's still a small part.
Yeah.
Nuclear is
Well,
people are always arguing about whether to ramp it up or it's too expensive or get rid
Yeah.
of it all.
Well, I think nuclear, I mean, it's still about 20% of the generation of electricity. I remember going back to our Gainesville days, our analysis of nuclear power, 10 to 1, it showed positive net energy, It always looked, as long as you could handle the waste reasonably, it always looked, pretty attractive. But it's gotten very expensive. So, I mean, those new plants they built down in the Southern Company built recently, if you do a calculation of the recent estimates of cost, the capital cost, there's something like $16,000 a kilowatt, which is huge. I mean, that's compared to a couple thousand for renewables, maybe 4,000 for coal or something. So it's really ballooned in cost. So it's been an issue, big issue, cost. But they operate for a long period of time, and they're pretty clean from a point of view of emissions. So I don't know. I mean, storage technology is a big deal, right?
yeah.
Somebody
Yeah.
comes up with cheaper storage, it's gonna really change the renewables picture.
Put it, Odum used to say, you got to put it into the volcano, put it back down into the earth, recycle again.
All the spent fuel.
The
That's
problem
not
is
not a controversial idea.
I mean, look at Japan, Fukushima, huge, I mean, unbelievable
Yeah.
disaster. Of course, there was Chernobyl, but people are still building nuclear power plants all around the world, so it's
Yeah.
hard to know. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen with any great alacrity, but
It's pretty incredible. I mean, we were looking at the statistics this morning in my class, and that we've stopped building reactors basically by what, like 1980 or something, roughly. And it's still increased, and it's been level for these last 44 years
in the U.S., right?
Yeah, in the U.S. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's I think a lot of it was economics. I think it just turned out to be more expensive. And I mean, if you look at the development of solar and wind, I mean, it really has happened very quickly. I mean, the efficiency of solar panels have really come down. I mean, the cost has come down. Efficiency has gone up quite a bit. I mean, as to whether it can power the whole system, I don't know. Remains to be seen.
Yeah, a lot of variability to handle.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of places where there's not any wind or solar is not very good either.
Yeah.
We're taking all the best sites right now, so then that start coming down when you start using less available winds.
We need a better grid.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think,
That's right.
I mean, nuclear power still may have a role. I mean, they're finishing up those, is it 2 plants, but Southern's building, or is it 1?
That was one. There's a good article in the Post, wasn't it, just last week or something about all that?
Yeah,
think
there
I
was a
read.
good article about what's really interesting, the article was about the increasing demand by the
AI
internet,
and
internet
data
AI and
centers.
internet
Yeah.
sites. Unbelievable how that demand has gone up. So information costs something. It's not free.
I looked up those stats. We globally, we spend about 3% of our electricity budget on data centers and crypto and all that stuff. but it's supposed to double in the next 10 years. So
Mhm.
I think the question for me was like, what's the maximum, what's the optimum amount of electricity that should be going towards information? And is there a biological or ecological model that that shows us any way forward? Yeah. The brain takes up 20% of your energy, right? In
Yeah,
a
yeah.
human.
Well, I was just reading, talking about the brain. I was just reading this guy. Is it Kurzweil? His name is Kurzweil. Ever heard of
Yeah, Ray
Kurzweil?
Kurzweil. Yeah.
Oh my God, that guy's really wild. He is really wild. Have you read him?
I just watched his YouTube video last week.
Oh yeah, I was watching a little bit of that, but I just read his 2005 book,
Uh-huh.
Towards the Singularity is Near. Apparently,
Yeah.
he's just written another book. He's updated the book, but it's the first third is all about the brain and how much we're learning about the brain. The second part's about genetics, another part about nanotechnology, and the final part about robotics and AI. Now, he's pretty smart about AI. I think he's pretty much, I mean, predicting what seems to be happening. But man, he's got some weird ideas about nanobots and nanotechnology and all these little robots that can be crawling inside you and replacing your hearts, replacing your brain. I mean, I can't. And the brain, well, I mean, the whole idea of having computers um, coupled to your brain, that could happen, I guess. But anyway, he's got some wild ideas about how, pretty soon we're going to be able to take all the information and all the way the brain processes, our brains process information. That's all going to be transferred to computers. And basically, we're going to have, you know, the brain power of a million times what we have now in 20 or 30 years. And it's going to be wild. It's going to, it's like, he's
Yeah.
really way out.
Well, it's all based on like the miniaturization of everything, right?
Yeah.
Everything's faster. The bits
Yeah.
are less power per bit.
And
Although he looks at cost usually, but
yeah, but he looks at all the trends, all the information technologies, and they're all, doubling every year or whatever, and the costs are coming down. I mean, everything's happening. You're right. He's right. And
yeah.
but he thinks the same thing's going to happen to brain, our brain understanding of brains, brain science, nanotechnology. Of course, genetics, it is sort of happening. I mean, genetics have really advanced quite a bit.
Well,
So
supposedly the first AI designed genetic drug just got approval or something. I don't know what it was for, but that was a big
yeah,
deal.
I think so. So
Um,
but he's wild.
yeah.
And he's on his supplement stuff. He takes 100 pills a day, and I don't know, he's figured out exactly what he should take, and it's going to make him live longer and healthier life. I mean, it's crazy. I don't know.
Yeah. What are, anything else about Odom, or like Charlie had this great story about meeting Odom the first time, and Walter had these stories. I know it was Ariel Lugo, being out in the field with Odom and just interacting with him.
Oh, it was great being out in the field. Odom was a trip. Silver Springs, man, watch him eat submerged aquatic vegetation. It was great.
I don't know this story. Tell this story. What happened?
No, we'd be in Silver Springs. We're all sitting there, lined up, watching him give us a lecture on Silver Springs. Obviously, he knew a lot about it. He had done pioneering work there, and he would just be in the water and he'd be going down and plucking out, vegetation and eating it. It was illustrating exactly what happens with the herbivores. And it's just like,
I haven't heard that before.
I mean, here, all these students, and here's this guy, H.T. Odum, and he charges off into the water and starts giving a lecture and digging up plants. And it was all for effect.
yeah, exactly.
So he's like completely dressed in like his regular clothes, right? He's just jumping in the water.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much. We're on the beach. I remember we used to collect sample, do diversity count, try to estimate diversities of
Seashells.
of resources on the beach, or of was it the shells? We'd be collecting shells and trying to do a rough estimate of the diversity on a beach system. They'd be out there. I mean, he just really incredible. He seemed to know everything about everything. It's just like,
So you've met a lot of smart people working at the academy. I always think when I go to scientific conference, I usually think about this a lot. Like I was always look for a person I thought was equivalent to Odom in intelligence, and I just never I've never met that person, even today. I don't know if you felt that way or not, but it was incredible the amount of knowledge he had and the way, I mean, obviously his thinking too is just,
Yeah.
so
Well,
unique.
I think that a lot of the people that I ran into were much more, and they weren't as broad as he was, but they were very, like, electrochemists would know so much about electrochemistry, fuel cells and all kinds of different aspects of electrochemistry. It was hard to ever find somebody who has such a broad knowledge of everything, in a way. Very hard.
True general scientist, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the questions we like to ask is if he was here today, anything you would want to ask him or talk to him about?
Yeah, I'd like to get his impression. I mean, his view of what's going on with technology. Does he, does he have a static view of technology, or is it going to evolve? Energy technology. I'd like to have his view again of what's going on with global warming. Maybe it's basically back to homeostatic static Earth. Maybe he would still believe that.
Yeah.
Or what's going on in molecular biology and genetics. Where does he think that's all headed?
It'd be fun to get his take on COVID.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he would see those. I mean, we've had these pulses before.
Yeah.
We've had epidemics before.
Well, did he worked with some epidemiologists? I don't know if they were at Florida or not, but I remember one guy came to visit when I was in school there. It seemed like he had been a colleague, maybe. He was younger than Odum, but
I'm
I
not
don't know if there was
sure.
if that happened when you guys were there, or I mean, the medical school must have been pretty significant back then too, right?
There were a couple of people that came up from the med school and participated in seminars, and I think there was even a doctor from down there that took HT's class.
Mm.
I'm trying to remember his name. He now lives out at Oak-Hammock, which is the senior living facility that the University of Florida has built on south of campus.
Oh, really?
There at one point. But
What about
Is that Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Jim.
No,
No,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I was thinking about in terms of people coming in. Remember there was a historian that came in to study with Odum,
yeah,
trying to understand, using energetics to understand history,
right.
which sort of makes sense in a way. I mean,
Yeah,
we couple to resources, you could understand. But certainly epidemics and pulsing power, Odum's concept of pulsing power. Now we have this epidemic. Obviously, if we didn't have a modern vaccine, I mean, things could have been a lot more disastrous, obviously. So obviously, our technology is ameliorated things in a way.
yeah.
But that was pretty. I mean, I think another thing I would have liked to get his view on was, he wrote the book. What was that book he wrote about the coming down?
Prosperous Way Down.
The Prosperous Way Down. I think he forgets about the human reaction to coming down. I mean, I would like his take on the, fundamentalism and what's going on in this country with anti-democratic forces, and I mean, people are not going to be happy about going down, and that's what's that going to lead to, So I don't know what his take on that would be. I don't think it's going to be pleasant if we do, if we go down like that.
Well, that's what he was kind of saying with the book. There's two ways of going down. There's one where we think of it as prosperity going down, or then there's this one that seems to be happening, which is tearing ourselves apart. And I think he was hopeful that people would, think about the prosperous way.
Right. I'm not sure about human nature. If you look at what's,
Yeah,
I mean, who's gonna take the lead? I mean, it's just a self-organizing system. People, there are all kinds of people are going to take advantage of people's fears. So I don't know. It's strange times we live in.
Yeah.
I like to make the analogy with like a surfer riding a wave. It's much more fun to ride the dissipating wave than it is to watch the wave grow. That's where all the fun is. There's your Odum optimism,
Yeah.
prosperity. Well,
Yeah.
the energetics will change, right? The signature of their energy basis changes. So yeah, people have to adapt, but right, how well they adapt.
Well,
That's the
maybe it already has changed because, I mean, as you know, for a lot of people in this country, or their standard of living has come down for 30 or 40 years. I mean, and I think we see the reaction of, I think the people who've been attracted to Trump are people who have a lot of complaints. They have grievances about what's been going on for the last 30 or 40 years. I mean, wages have come down, real wages. Everything's expensive. Jobs
did
have gone
Odom ever
offshore.
did Odom ever talk much about? He didn't really talk a lot about politics from a formal manner. I think when we were around, but I don't know if he did when you guys if he thought about Kennedy and they were about and Johnson and must have come up with the Vietnam War. He
And
really stayed away from that kind of stuff, or
he didn't like he once said, I think I've already said this once before, that somebody was out protesting during the war, and he said, you either are a scientist or you are,
advocate.
advocate, but you can't be both. And, you need to make up your mind about which one you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
No, no.
So he stayed strongly on the science side.
Yeah, I think I don't think he never really talked much about politics, but I always thought he thought the system was going to adapt in some fashion.
But I do remember
But
being at his
it's
house. He would throw parties at his house. Like I think when we had Bernie, or maybe like the beginning of the semester or something. And some reason he invited all the grad students over to his house, and maybe it was like the State of the Union or something. Must have been the middle of the semester, State of the Union. And I remember him turning on the TV and then yelling at the TV, watching the State of the Union or something.
Really?
I had this video, or maybe he talked about it or something, like watching it and yelling at the TV. But
I missed that party.
because he had that one little room where he had this TV, off to the side behind the kitchen.
Well, when you listen to politicians, of course, it just drives you crazy.
Yeah.
Because it's so, whatever, chicken in every pot or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's probably what drove him nuts.
I remember he said the key to a strong marriage is for each person to have the husband and wife to have their own TV.
And they did.
Probably true.
Yeah. Of course, today now we should have a lot of happy marriages because nobody has a TV. They all have their own little screen.
Own smartphone. Well, I'll tell you, speaking of Odom's house, now that reminds me, Odom traveled a lot. It's true, but I used to go to his house, and he'd have a little office in the back. Remember? And I'd go in there, and he had all his books around, and I would sit down with him, and we'd sometimes be talking about my dissertation or whatever it was, for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And he would be, he'd be throwing out different ways of interpreting what I was doing, or he'd be giving me some suggestions about what I ought to do, or he'd be looking at the graph and trying to figure out what it means. I mean, it was really a lot of quality time with him.
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing. And that was always nice to go out there, even though it was a little bit of trepidation as to what was going to come out of that session.
Everybody felt that way. It was
Yeah.
very.
I think we had some technical difficulty there.
Just getting echo.
Yeah.
I mean, I still think though that I'm so glad I studied with Odum, even though some of the stuff you might say was not very practical, maybe, but the whole concept of energy and environment and the connection with economics. I mean, it was so right on. It was so prescient, and it's I've used that perspective, that systems perspective, throughout my career. Whether when I was doing my own work, which I could, focus on that. Or at the academy where, I focused on energy, and energy was connected to so many other things. I mean, it was just amazing, Energy is still essential to what we're doing. I mean, everything is being affected by it. I mean, wars, Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, what's going on, every country now about renewables or nuclear or fossil or climate change, everything's connected to energy. It's like, you can't get away from it. It's like,
The
I mean,
basis, the energy basis of everything.
so I say to students, if you want to, if you want to have an interesting career, and you want to have, a lot of opportunities, whether it's in jobs or it's academia or whatever it is, I mean, energy is a good thing to be in, one way or another. Focus on energy.
Mm.
I don't know
Great.
how your students feel about it, Dave. I mean, you
Yeah, it's the generations have changed, they've some of them appreciate it for sure. Others, it's hard to,
take it for granted.
yeah, take it for granted. Most of the climate overwhelms a lot of the conversation
Yeah.
too,
Okay.
suppressing carbon.
But that's connected to energy.
It's connected to energy, yeah.
I mean,
So that's what we talk about in class.
yeah.
Well, great. This is I knew this was to be a gem of a conversation, and you didn't disappoint, Jim. So I really, really appreciate it.
Well,
So any
well, thanks
final thoughts, comments, questions?
Well, what are you teaching these days, by the way?
I still teach the energy and environment course. I teach it
Okay.
more as we still do modeling and we do the
Mhm.
energy stuff, but I try to incorporate it into the design so students can use. I found today that the way the world's changed with teaching and learning, that to make it more active for the students. So bring in some real practical applications for
Yeah.
what they're learning. So,
All right.
um,
That's good.
and then I started teaching a course on artificial intelligence for the environment. So all this chat GPT stuff.
Okay.
So that's been a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
hope
That's
to
interesting.
continue more of that. And it's funny because we had the 50th anniversary meeting at AES back in what was that, June last year, and I looked and see what Odum had said about, kind of AI and language modeling. And of course, he has that one model in systems ecology where he shows you how you can apply the systems diagramming to understand English. Um, so even then, he's prescient about modeling language.
Hmm. I have
So
to go back and look at that. Forgot about that. I know he said some interesting things about information. So
yeah, there's a whole chapter on the information.
okay, yeah.
But
But I think
yeah,
you're saying students are more. I understand that they're more practical in the sense that I think they feel more pressure to get a job. They have to earn a living somehow, and maybe they're focused on more practical things. I don't know.
practical, and I think they're really interested, in impact. They want to have an
Okay.
impact, and a lot of them are drawn
Right.
towards like policy. They think that's the way that they're going to have impact, and justice. That's timely these days. So
Yep.
it's fun.
Yeah,
Still
that's
fun.
good. That's good.
Oh, great.
What's going down in Gainesville, Mark, these days? Is there a active systems ecology group happening? What's going on in environmental sciences department? I mean, can't hear you.
Some of your audio is not working too great, Mark. I don't know if it's just in the last few minutes here.
So we have a conference every year in every 2 years, and the next conference is in 2025.
All right. Okay, good.
Be good to
So, I
see.
mean, the environmental sciences department, you think they were having trouble competing with the other aspects of engineering, or?
No, not at all.
No,
We
they
were
still
the most productive of the engineering departments.
Hmm.
Between civil and us, we were very productive, and civil, I didn't have very much research at all.
Yeah.
So the idea was, well, we'll combine the two of them, and so one of them won't look so bad, and
Yeah. Okay.
another one.
and we had plenty of students.
Mm.
We were very, it was a good, healthy department. It still is. I mean, the people there are really working well, and they're, getting lots of money. That's what the university wants.
Yeah, of course. You got your new president, your new governor and everything.
Yeah, the politics in the state. I mean, we are probably out ahead of the rest of the country, but
Maybe.
in terms of our, who we've got running this place, and both the university and the state, and what they're doing to higher education it's sad. It's really
Yeah.
sad.
I guess Bob Walker's going to retire, he said.
Yeah.
I think he's delayed it by a year because he still wants to work on a project in Ecuador. But he's going to move up to northern Michigan or whatever.
Get away from it. Yeah,
He built a house up there on an island.
good.
Have you spoken much of Bob? Or
I used to run into him on campus quite a bit, but I don't go to campus very much anymore.
yeah.